I'm just here back again to introduce you to our incredible moderator, Amir Ghafagi. We are so grateful, Amir, that you've joined us tonight. Amir Ghafagi, and I'll ask to start the recording now, because we want, okay, awesome. Amir is an award-winning New York City-based journalist. He is currently a Report for America core member with Documented, read his work. Much of Amir's beat explores the intersections of labor, race, class, immigration, and urban policy. A lifelong New Yorker, Amir was born and raised in Jackson Heights, Queens, into a working-class Muslim immigrant family. His mother is Puerto Rican, and his father is an immigrant from Egypt, and we could not think of a better person to facilitate this conversation. So I'm going to pass it to Amir to introduce our packed panel, and we'll get started.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. So yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and I'm excited to introduce our panelists. I think a lot has already been said that I don't want to, retread this similar water, but I think it's really important for me to be here tonight as a Muslim American, as an Arab American, with all the things that are happening right now in the world, to have a town hall about surveillance. And I think that's really important for everybody here, because it seems like things are getting much more intense in this country when it comes to being Arab and being Muslim. So without further ado, I want to introduce our amazing panelists. The first panelist is Elizabeth Vasquez. She's the director of the Science and Surveillance Project at Brooklyn Defense Services in Brooklyn. Before joining BDS, Elizabeth worked as a staff attorney in the trial division of the Public Defender Services for the District of Columbia and an associate at the Newfield Scheich Buston LLP litigation, wrongful conviction, civil rights cases, and state and federal courts throughout the country. I hope I said all that. That was it? Anything I missed? Okay. The next panelist we have here is the lovely Fabian Rogers. How are you, Fabian? I feel like a game show host. Fabian Rogers is a constituent advocate for New York State Senator Jabari Brisport, a member of HOPE Housing Organizers for People Empowerment, and BGJ, Brownsville Green Justice in Brooklyn. He has been on the front lines with his neighbors resisting the use of surveillance technology, housing, and environmental injustice in his community. He continues to advocate and build awareness around housing justice, environmental justice, anti-surveillance, privacy rights, facial recognition, biometric technology in residential communities, local, state, federal government, civil, legal, and tech organizations. That was a mouthful. Okay, you're doing a lot. Good work. Next, I would like to introduce Naz Ahmad, Acting Director of CLEAR. Currently acting director with Creating Law Enforcement Accountability Responsibility Project. Did I say that right? Yeah, so which is the CLEAR project. CLEAR aims to address the unmet legal needs of Muslim and other communities and movements in New York City area and beyond that are particularly affected by national security and counterterrorism policies and practices. Through her work at CLEAR, Naz represents individuals who are approached for questioning by local and federal law enforcement, targeting for surveillance, are placed on federal watch lists, or who have had immigrant benefits withheld from them on national security grounds. I think I'm going to need you after this panel. Next, last but not least, is Gerald Brierson. Am I saying your last name right? Yeah. Bryson, okay, and Jordan Flowers, co-founders of the ALU. Gerald and Jordan, together with Chris Smalls and Derek Palmer, collaborated as co-founders to organize and establish the inaugural union at Amazon JFK 8 in Staten Island, New York. They have dedicated approximately 4 years towards advocating for the rights of Amazon workers, striving to secure their first ever contract. Regrettably, yes, please. Regrettably, Amazon has unjustly targeted them, resulting in Gerald's wrongful termination and implying that Jordan voluntarily resigned, although in reality his termination was attributed to health concerns. So with that out the way, let's dive right in. Elizabeth and Fabian, if you may, I'm just curious. The average person might feel like, why is surveillance such a big deal? Why should I worry about it? If I didn't do anything wrong and I have nothing to hide, why should I care? Can you help us understand that?
Hello? Okay, great. I actually wanted to start this with just some basic definitions of like surveillance that I did a quick lookup on just Google overall. So Cambridge Dictionary says the careful watching of a person or place, especially by police or army, because of a crime that has happened or is expected. Merriam-Webster says a close watch kept over someone or something, as by a detective. Oxford Languages, which is something I believe is generated by Google, don't quote me on that. Close observation, especially of a suspected spy or criminal, he who found himself put under surveillance by military intelligence. And last but not least, the whimsical Wikipedia. Surveillance is the monitoring of behavior, many activities, or information for the purpose of information gathering, influencing, managing, or directing. And the reason why I like bring up the basic, definitions of like surveillance is just understanding like the preface of it. Like it already alludes to the idea in like these circles of there's someone to be watched because it's presumed that they've done something. No proof. No proof at all. Just a gut instinct kind of thing. You add policing in there, a lot of times like the way things go is police can go off of gut instinct and validate that through their job. When I think about different forms of authority, it creates a very perilous relationship between like authority and society, because we can't sit here and act like we don't have our biases. And the problem, at least, I love America, I do, but if there's one thing we haven't gotten right for the longest is biases and how it plays a role in what our relationship with authority and society looks like. So when you have folks that have inherent biases that can get baked into their job, baked into their points of influence, that can affect how they interact with society. And so you add surveillance and then technology also built by people who also have inherent biases. It creates a recipe for terror, in my opinion. And if there's one thing I can say is like when you think about these technologies, don't think about it as technology. Think about it as advanced tools, because when you think about it as advanced tools, you start to realize someone had to make this tool, someone has to use it, someone has to be affected by it, the impact has to be recorded, and it's profiting somebody somewhere. And when you think about it in that sort of context, you start to really expand on the idea of what is surveillance really? Why do we have it? What's the need for it? What's our relationships to it? Why are we so stuck on this idea instead of investing more in community, investing in more better sort of solutions in terms of what's more productive for society rather than authorities? I don't want to get too carried away, but yeah.
I really appreciate, Fabian, your immediate focus on the inherent definition of surveillance being inclusive of this idea of criminality. As a public defender representing people who are charged with crimes, the thing that I have come to most closely understand is that even though the public narrative around surveillance is heavily tied to this idea of security, or this notion that there is criminality that is inherent in what we're trying to do with this project, the people that I represent are being surveilled regardless of any notion of activity on their part that might subject them to that surveillance. What I mean by that, in less abstract terms, is I pick up a client who is charged with a crime, yes, but when I get discovery in that case, the police have a file on that person that far predates any activity that they are now being charged with in court. And sitting where I sit and seeing what I see, the NYPD in particular has a file on every person in this room. And the reason that you should care is not that there is some sort of notion that you're walking around everywhere and you're being surveilled constantly. I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat. But what I am saying is what Fabian was talking about, which is that we have structured a part of our society to make this entire passive collection of information operate on this notion of criminality that has no basis in reality and is instead steeped in a history that we all need to reckon with. And so the reason we should care about surveillance is that what surveillance is doing is it is reinforcing the racism that is inherent in our country.
But what does it look like now? Like, if you can describe it in more concrete terms,
Sure.
what is governmental surveillance? What is corporate surveillance?
I'll take the government piece because that's what I see more often, although we could talk corporate also because the government loves to grab what Instagram has on you. But if we look at the NYPD today, the way that the NYPD has set up their system is that they have sensors placed around the city of various forms that are designed to collect information, whether that's a license plate reader at bridges and tunnels, or that's a surveillance camera at bodega, or that is a shot spotter sensor that is down the street from your home. Those sensors are out there and they are grabbing data constantly. That data is then being funneled into storage spaces. So there's the domain awareness system, look it up if you want to get scared. There's the enterprise case management system. There is the gang database. There is the OCME's DNA database. We could go on, but there's a whole tranche of collection of information spaces, storage, their data lake. And then on top of that, what they're doing is they're running complex analytics on that data. So they are using the data they're taking from you to create analytics to then do things like, I don't know, Naz, you go to CUNY pretty much every day. Do you ever drive?
Not anymore.
Okay, but you used to? Yeah. So if you used to drive around the city, what the NYPD has done is they have the license plate reads of your path around the city. Let's say they want to know tomorrow where is Naz going to be at 4 p.m. They mine the license plate reader data that they have to predict where Naz is going to be because we all follow routine patterns. That is the structure of NYPD's surveillance today in one example. I think these guys could probably speak better to the corporate aspects.
Yeah, please do, because you're making it sound like we're packages in a warehouse, you know, that they just could pull our information up at like a barcode.
Hello? All right. Yeah, definitely inside Amazon. The biggest problem in there is time off task. And just quickly sum it up, the moment you scan your badge to clock in, they're already tracking you. They're tracking you from, they track you from when you clock in to the station, and they track every item you pick, and you can't even take a break, honestly. And at the end of the week, let's say you work 4 days straight, they tally it up, and they use it against you. They say, why weren't you picking for these 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes? Oh, only because you had to use the bathroom, but they'll still hold you accountable for it because you didn't get that order out on time. And even more so just packaging wise, you know, when you get a package delivered, they can see where you guys live because you guys ordered, but at the same time, they keep that in a database. And for workers like me and Joe, you know, when we get terminated, they actually sell your information to ICE. So, you know, battling Amazon, you know, it's tracking from the inside and then from us organizing on the outside. Even organizing at the bus stop at JFK, you know, they had sent police squads to come arrest us. They had security come remove us, destroy our property, our rallies, our flags, just because they wanted to scare the workers. They don't want them to unionize. But we made that effort to stick with the community and let them know that being surveilled by Amazon, you know, that they could do anything to you, they could track you and do whatever they want.
Good evening, everybody. Yeah, basically what he said is true. From the moment, there's two gates actually, you forgot one. When you come in the door, they have like the turnstiles, so you have to badge in there. That's when they're really first tracking you. You didn't even sign in yet, but they're tracking you from the minute that you enter the building, you know, to the time you sign in. Sometimes they'll use that against you too, like, yo, but you tagged in at 7 o'clock, how come you know 7:30 over here? Like any little thing. But basically, they're using analog system, and like he said, it's you know, basically clocking you. It has your name in there, and it knows what you're supposed to be doing. It's counting how much you're doing per hour. It's counting how long it's taking you to do anything. If you stop moving, that's when it starts counting down. Okay, this guy or this woman, they're not at their station. So it's counting down like that. And every time you go to the bathroom, like he said, it'll take 5, 6 minutes off, 5, 6 minutes off. So say, you know, on average, you're 4 minutes and, you know, and you're back at your station. So now you're taking, you know, you got 6 minutes, you know, regardless, you know, it goes back to analytics, what she was talking about. Analytics, for those who really don't, like, it's giving, what the AI is doing is giving you a probability that you will, you know, a probability that you take 4 minutes. So where are these other 7 minutes? And then they just count on for a while, let you go a week or two, and add it up. Then they say, you've been away from your station for 2 hours. You know, things like that of that nature. But basically that's what analytics is, and that's what we're dealing with, and you're dealing with worldwide. I, myself, when I got terminated, happened to, I'm fighting a case of my own in Amazon, and I came across somebody that put me on to some information about Amazon, how they were taking everybody's profile. That means anybody who's ever worked for Amazon is in their system, okay? So once you work there, whether you did anything or not, they're gonna keep, you know, your records, you know, your information. They put it in a system, they put all this together, and what they did is they sold a system eventually, which started with all this analog stuff, watching us inside the building, you know, and watching cameras, and like I said, the computer counting down when you're not on. All these little analog things led to AI that they eventually sold about the time that I first started fighting with them, and it's called Project Nimbus, for those of you who don't know. And this system is a profile system. It has analytic thoughts. So, you know, if you did something when you were 14, the probability that you did it again, or you will do it again, and, you know, I'm sad to say a lot of these people, you know, they're suffering because of that alone. I mean, Palestinian people, everything. They're suffering over analytics, so, which are giving them probable cause, like this man said before, like a sort of a gut feeling for AI, which is probably, you know, just totally wrong. But, you know, I'm going to leave it there for right now.
That sounds totally like an Orwellian dystopia. And it seems like there's a lot of give and take between the state and corporate America, right? It seems like a lot of the same behaviors are being mirrored by each other. I don't know which one starts and which one ends. So I was wondering, Naz, if you can tell us a little bit about where the hell did this come from? How did this start? What did it look like before? And what's driving the change?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I think for a lot of us to think about, so much of what surveillance happened, or how surveillance was done by, not just by the government, by corporate actors going back to the 90s. Like, we're talking about records that weren't digitized, records that people had to hand search through. Somebody pointed out to me, I think maybe this was last week or the week before, that the reason Enron, like, that scandal came to light was because it took a computer like so much less time to find out what would have taken like 3 people poring over the records over 6 months to find out, oh, this fraud is actually happening. And so much, and I think this is not new to a lot of people here, but governments react in times of crisis, and they focus on targeting a specific community, and inevitably the rules and the procedures and the practices that they put in place for this so-called emergency, this so-called threat, they expand out to apply to everybody. And so just to think about, like, one particular context of this is, you know, somebody mentioned ICE. ICE is not, you know, an organization that has existed for the history of our country. It's only fairly recent, going back to the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and the creation of, so, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, so basically immigration police, and USCIS, which is the agency that grants people immigration benefits to stay in this country. And there was a lot of pressure basically to securitize those systems, right? To make sure that they were keeping track of people who are applying, who are coming in, who are leaving the country. So this push to, like, for example, digitize records and digitize fingerprints, people, like, the whole reason that Bush and then Obama were able to implement these programs whereby ICE became aware immediately when somebody who is not a citizen got arrested is because of this fingerprint issue, right? Because as soon as you got fingerprinted, ICE could get a ping that, oh yeah, this person's not a citizen, they've been arrested, this might be a charge that could make them deportable. Or they may not even be in the country with lawful status. And I will add, going along to what Elizabeth has said, is I'm sure that it happened in the past, but just the sheer amount of data that corporations are collecting on us is a significant boon to law enforcement, because you have no idea how many times they go to the transparency reports for Google, for Facebook, for Apple. They put out these reports about how many legal process orders or legal orders they receive a year, asking them to turn over account data. And they'll tell you what percentage of those orders they've complied with, and they'll even break it down by country. And obviously, they're getting the most requests from the U.S., right? So that's just something to think about, that the ability of the government to use what is being collected by private businesses against you is greatly expanded.
That's insane. One thing it came to my head right now is, if they're collecting all this data, and I guess this is a question for you, Elizabeth, if they're collecting all this data on us, is it then essentially useless? You know, if they collect so much of it, why should we be so worried if they got something on everybody?
Did I just turn it off? No, okay. So this is an interesting question. I think this really goes to the conversation that is live right now about what is going on with computer processing. Artificial intelligence gets thrown around a lot. Data science is another term that is super exciting at the moment. We haven't really settled in on what the definition of any of these things are, but what we're talking about is the computer's ability to recognize patterns in large amounts of information. And so, unfortunately, the direction that we're headed from a technology standpoint is we need more data in order for these systems to be able to process and come to the conclusions that they want to draw. So analytics that we were talking about before rely on robust, large, massive troves of information in order to be able to be trained, in order to be able to operate, and in order to be able to draw insights. So instead, we're in a moment where what the system wants in order to be effective is actually more information, not less.
So it's just all about just numbers, getting just a bunch of information as much as possible, input that there, and then they can derive information that they're looking for through patterns.
Correct. Or if we're talking about facial recognition as an example, there are a lot of facial recognition algorithms that are on the market, developed in different countries, developed by different corporations. But if you look at Clearview AI, which you've probably seen the articles in the New York Times, and Kashmir Hill has a new book about this particular technology, the reason that Clearview AI has been so effective is that they, as a company, were able to scrape massive amounts of photos from the public space and then also from private space in terms of what we were all doing on social media. It was their ability to sort of break through the wall of what was acceptable and take all of this information that actually turned their algorithm into a more successful search tool than some of the other systems that were in existence.
I see. Is there any way of determining, and this is for either Naz or Elizabeth, any way of determining who, as of recently or historically, has been the main targets of this this information, or this technology, rather, this surveillance technology?
Of course. And it would be the people that we all would suspect that the system is designed to target. What we have been working on recently at Brooklyn Defender Services is figuring out how to calculate what we're calling surveillance load. What we're trying to understand is, if we look at our city as a whole, and we look at the people in our city individually, who's carrying the most surveillance load? And our early indications from looking at our own data is that what we instinctively understand is correct, which is that the Black and brown communities in our city are the ones that are being most heavily surveilled. The Muslim community is being most heavily surveilled. The Black neighborhoods in our city are the ones that are being inundated with surveillance sensors, with police presence, and with the collection of this information.
Naz, do you want to add anything about what? Well, I guess let's bring it down a notch, right, in terms of what's happening in our communities, right? I'm really curious to know what are the direct impacts our communities are feeling, Black and brown communities, specifically in New York, are dealing with, and how they react to this surveillance. So I guess this is a question for you, Fabian. What did surveillance in your building do to your life and to your neighbors?
Yeah, so for me, what I dealt with, and again, this comes from the lapse of trying to deal with surveillance in a post 9/11 kind of country. And so that gave like blanket consent to be as invasive as possible for the sake of national good. Now, the issue of that is when there's no regulations or regulatory practices or any sort of protective measures for everyday people for the sake of having the best surveillance in order to try to counteract the ideas of terrorism or the potential next, avoiding the next 9/11 at the cost of people's privacy, is it starts to trickle down in other parts of society where if there's a lapse of regulatory practices, you find that corporate finds a way to then exacerbate already ongoing biases that they have. And so within housing in particular, or private sector, you'll find that landlords basically invest in different forms of landlord tech. That's like the term for it now, where it exacerbates what we already know to be is housing is hell as of right now. You have a housing bubble in New York City, of course, but it comes at the cost of being widely over expensive for so many people. And on top of that, landlords want to make sure that they get the most bang for their buck because there's nothing stopping them from doing that. And so in exacerbating or just trying to expedite this process of get as much money as possible without having to deal with as many tenants as possible, you'll find that people start to cut corners and invest in technologies that may not have any sort of validation studies. And so for me in particular, I lived in this place called Atlantic Plaza Towers. 2 big towers, you can't miss it, on Atlantic Avenue between Thomas Boylan and Rockaway. They're in smack dab middle of Ocean Hill, Brownsville, right off the A&C line. There's a big grocery store in the middle of it. It's like a cornerstone for a lot of people to walk by and things like that. In the mid-2010s, the owner, Robert Nelson, and Nelson Management, basically, they were just trying to catch on to the housing bubble that was already going on. And so they were willing to invest in gentrification, which again, is understandable. It's profitability, I get it. Now, what does it come at the cost of? People that look like me. As Atlantic Towers is predominantly elderly Black women populations that end up having grandkids and kids that look like me. So in the midst of trying to catch up with gentrification and the housing bubble, basically the landlord switched the buildings from Mitchell-Lama to rent stabilization because moving from one subsidized form of housing to another, like rent stabilization, makes it a bit easier to expedite the process of getting people kicked out of their homes for any sort of little offense or whatever, or any sort of nuisance kind of thing that a landlord could try to pin you in housing court. So in the midst of this transition of catching up to gentrification, trying to bring profitability to the buildings, and then just taking advantage of the lapse of proper regulatory practices around technologies that surveil, the landlord took it upon himself to try to invest in trendy technologies in the late 2010s. So in about 2018, Nelson applied two separate applications with the Homes and Community Renewal, the Department of Homes and Community Renewal, which is the government overseer of buildings like mine, which is rent stabilized housing. So there's nothing that stops there's nothing that makes it legal or like mandatory that the landlord has to notify us. So fun fact, we even get notification from the landlord. You know where we got our notification from? The government agency that has to, by law, give us a mandatory survey to ask us whether or not we want to deal with this application. And on top of that, if you want to really understand how non-pro tenant a lot of the different agencies we deal with and the landlords you deal with are, even within that survey, when they're asking you, hey, how do you feel about this docket number, yada, 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 which states it's this technology, this, that, and the fourth, are you for it or are you against it? If you're against it, you have to explain why. But if you're okay with it, totally fine. Blanket consent, go ahead, throw it in the mail. But if you have issues, you have to explain why and give valid reasons why. So within fall of 2018, basically the tenant association was in a large scramble because we were trying to figure out what's going on here. This isn't your typical MCI or IAI, which is major capital improvements or individual apartment improvements. Anyone within rent stabilized housing, you probably heard these types of things, or you've seen your landlord try to apply these things to the building, making grandiose cosmetic updates rather than infrastructural updates. So you might end up with new tiles and cabinets, but your plumbing still sucks. That's the basic rundown of like rent stabilized housing overall. And so in the midst of that, with us trying to scramble, with the mailing system being changed over, where we weren't even in the original place we were supposed to be at, we had to go to the basement in this makeup sort of mail room. A lot of those mandatory surveys got lost in translation. But even in that rush, we made our best effort to do an informal opposition of getting as many sort of oppositions in terms of like the surveys, and then doing like a group letter to send off to HCR. To this day, we have yet to ever hear a response about, funny enough. On top of that, we got help through Brooklyn Legal Services, their Tenants' Rights Coalition, who, thank God, they literally came into the neighborhood just a couple years before. And so they were a few blocks away. They helped us with trying to push back against the Metro-Lama transition. And so where they came in was basically helping us trying to figure out what is this technology doing. And the technology in particular, I'm sorry I haven't even gotten to that part because that's how dramatic my life was a couple years ago. It was a heat mapping facial recognition technology that was supposed to go to the front terminals of both buildings. Not every terminal of the buildings. We were working with key fobs. So there are a bunch of different key fob access points all throughout the building. Basically the front entrances, the back entrances, parking lot, and like the driveways overall, and like the basement, I guess, to get to like the laundry room. They were only going to change the front terminal of each building. So whether or not you're a tenant or you're someone who's subletting or someone who's just coming to visit a friend, basically you were going to have to find your way to dealing with this technology and interacting with it. And basically for us, that was a large no-no because the heat mapping software basically was going to make a heat map, like a weather map of your face. So technically, it doesn't look like your face. But if you're looking at the temperature of my face, that makes me wonder about the health implications of this thing, because if this is infrared technology, how far is it invading my skin? How much am I interacting with the system? How does it affect the people that live with me or want to come visit me? Where's this data going? Can it be subpoenaed? Is it in the access of police? We don't know. Again, all off the simple fact that there was a lapse of regulatory practices around surveillance technologies. So again, I'm trying to like build out this big funnel of like trickle down effects of what happens when you let a country kind of go willy-nilly for the sake of privacy at all costs. Like, this is the worst example of by any means necessary that I think Malcolm X ever tried to chase for, in my opinion. But basically from that, fall 2018 to fall 2019, with the help of BLS, basically we collaborated, went on a large media tour because there was no way to sue the landlords in court, because there's nothing in law that says the landlord can't install this technology and tenants can't interact with this technology. There was nothing protecting us. There was nothing stopping the landlord. So instead, we became muckrakers for a good year, going to different tech conferences, webinars, town halls, hosting stuff, testifying, being at so many different events, all to have this grandiose town hall at our building in fall 2019, just before Thanksgiving, just to have Robert Nelson basically come and do a surprise visit because he couldn't deal with the pressure as much. It was too much to have to just hear his name be dragged in the mud for a year off of something he shouldn't have put in the building in the first place. Nor did he ask folks about, nor did he care for the opinions of the people. And so for him to do a surprise visit at our town hall and basically say, hey, I'm going to revoke this application, I'll leave it alone. Next time, I'll give y'all notice if I go about installing this kind of thing. It feels like a victory in some way, but that last sentence of, I'll do this better next time, lets you further know, again, there's not as much regulatory practices around these technologies. So if there's anything I'm really just trying to jab at here, it's like the surveillance state is so ingrained. When you try to talk about it, people look at you like you're crazy because it's just like, well, like, it's for our protection. But again, I want to double down on this idea that these technologies are not technologies. They're just advanced tools. They're tools that somebody built. They are not objective. They are subjective as hell. You want to know why? Because not every demographic put their own sort of biases into this technology. There's something missing within these texts. I'm not God, you're not God, none of us are God. So none of us can be objective by definition. I don't care how book smart, how street smart you are. When you're dealing with these types of technologies, basically, very basically, you have people that are putting their bias into a tool that expedites that already ongoing bias. And all it's doing is accelerating the activity that's already going on. We have a lot of ongoing and unaddressed biases within the society. These tools just expedite that process. That's all I really want y'all to understand, because that's what's important, and that helps better the sort of relationship of trying to get out this idea that we need to be in a surveillance state. I don't know what that future looks like, but it shouldn't be this. So I don't want to get too.
Let me ask you one quick follow-up.
Yes.
Everybody still there? Nobody got evicted?
From my knowledge, no. What happened was in February of 2020, I believe in 2020, as a retaliation, like on our closing party, when we finally closed the case with BLS, we got mail of a new major capital improvement being installed in the building. So instead of falling back on surveillance tech, now the landlord dealt with this typical landlord harassment techniques within rent stabilized housing.
Well,
So
keep on fighting. Keep on fighting. That's all you could do, right? Naz, let me ask you this. Especially in Arab communities, in Muslim communities, in Southeast Asian communities, talk about the surveillance that those communities have faced really since 9/11, right? And I'm sure it's even before that, but really wrapped up, really increased after 9/11, and probably, with the climate today, I think it's really relevant. So if you can tell us a little bit more about that history and how it's affected those communities' day-to-day life.
Absolutely. So I think the overarching theme maybe of like the first 10 years after 9/11 were what law enforcement likes to call like human intelligence, like sending informants, undercover officers, other people into physical spaces to hear what people are talking about, listen to what people are saying. If many of you might be aware of the NYPD's Muslim surveillance program that was started shortly after 9/11. And part of that program was something called the demographics unit, whereby they literally went out and mapped Muslim communities in New York City. They sent people into restaurants, into different mosques. They sent people to Muslim student associations, not just in New York City, but also in New Jersey, I think at some point they had an undercover go on like a college student, like a college Muslim student association whitewater rafting trip upstate. And they would take note of like very minute details, like, oh, is this restaurant playing Al Jazeera? Is this restaurant owned by Egyptians? And they like categorized Muslims by quote unquote ancestries of interest. So they included like Black American Muslims in that. And there are documents where it's clear it's not about nationality. It's like, oh, we're excluding Coptic Orthodox Egyptians. We're not concerned about them. We're only concerned about the Muslims. So very clearly like targeted at Muslims. And obviously there are a lot of things that contributed to a climate of fear of, I don't know who I can trust in my mosque. I want to be careful about who I talk to about certain things. I want to be careful. Unfortunately, like, we're a religion that tries to, because I'm Muslim, we're a religion that tries to bring people into the religion. And so automatically new people who show up, people who don't appear to be Muslim from however you might judge them, are viewed with suspicion. They might not be as welcomed into the community as other people might be. There might not be that level of assumed trust. And so I would say that, like, in addition to all the stuff that like the government was doing to make it easier to track people, particularly through the immigration systems post 9/11, that's I would say like the big story of the first 10 years. And now I'm sure that that's still happening, but clearly and obviously since then people are much more concerned, and obviously as our lives have developed alongside these tools, the concerns also relate to like, okay, is this are the police in this like big Telegram channel that I'm part of, or are they in this big like WhatsApp group chat that I'm a part of? If I'm in like a 500-person group chat, like I should assume that is not a safe group chat, that is not like that. As soon as somebody from that group chat reports out to the police, or that person's phone gets seized for whatever reason, like that is no longer secure. And so I think that, and things go through waves, right? As you have like alluded to and other people have alluded to, there's especially people who are organizing in solidarity with Palestine at this very moment are fearing a lot with respect to repression, not just from the government, not just like, oh, is the FBI going to knock on my door if I go to a Palestine-related protest, but am I going to lose my job for posting about Palestine? Am I going to face repercussions at school if I post about Palestine? So, and it goes back to this idea that anybody who expresses solidarity with Palestine is inherently suspicious. And I like to think about that none of this is new, right? Like these are all developed tactics that the government has used against communities for a very long time. So I recently reread about something called Operation Boulder, which was undertaken primarily in the 70s after the attack at Munich, and it really involved the FBI going after Arab Americans and Arabs under this presumption that anybody who expressed solidarity with the Palestinian cause was somehow deemed a threat. And so all of that is to say that surveillance tech has amplified the ability of law enforcement to collect information on people, and I'm not sure that I think it's in some ways easier for people in Muslim communities to imagine like, oh yeah, they're going to send an undercover or an informant to our mosque and they're going to listen to what we say, but they don't necessarily appreciate like, oh yeah, they can go to Facebook and get a lot of your data. They can go to Apple and get a lot of your data, and you're not going to know necessarily for a few years. The other final thing I will add is that I think is maybe underappreciated by some folks is just the vast like networking and mapping that is being done at the border. So many of our clients for years now, going back, I would say to at least 2016, have reported having their phones searched at the border when they return from international travel. And CBP claims that they don't need a warrant to go into your phone. And people who are coming through the border feel like, oh, I can't refuse, I have to unlock my phone. And they have the capacity, so often somebody will get set aside their phone will be taken away from them, and then the officer will come back and say, okay, so how do you know the people in this WhatsApp group chat? Or how do you know these people? They have your phone number, as if you're supposed to be able to account for everybody in the world that has your phone number. You might not know who has your phone number. So that, I think, is something that is really underappreciated, and like goes to, they use this particularly in the context of visas. People who come here with valid visas, they interrogate them, and then they turn them around and just say, like, oh, you don't have a valid visa, because they have a lot of discretion at the border. And anybody, like I, for the very first time, saw like an example of a report that they can pull when they do like a forensic, dump of your phone. And it's wild the connections they can make. Like, as somebody was pointing out, like, oh, it looks like these two people are the people that I'm the most in touch with, or like among the people that I'm the most in touch with. But they just happen to be like very prolific messengers on my fantasy football group chat. Like, I'm not actually talking to them that often, but it would appear to law enforcement as though I am. So all of that to wrap up is that like tech has exacerbated a lot of the things that people have felt, but I'm not sure that they experience them in the same way, or thinking about them in the same way that they thought about, for example, like this human intelligence gathering.
Well, I could imagine that it really affects your behavior, right? And the relationships you have in your community, with your friends, with your family. I could imagine that it makes you feel nervous, and you would feel paranoid to speak to anybody. And I think that translates to not just the community, but to the workplace. And I think this goes to you, Jay and Gerald. At Amazon, the surveillance starts, and as you mentioned before, even before you get into the building. If you carry a bag, it has to be see-through, doesn't it? Right? You can't just walk in there with any kind of bag. They need to see what's in your bag right before you even go in. So if you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, no. They don't have to check your bag coming in. They don't give a crap. They give a crap what you coming out with. So, you know what I mean? You can come in there and pull a Keanu Reeves anytime, start flipping and doing machine gun fire, the whole 9 yards. They wouldn't care. It's when you coming out. It's the truth. It's the truth. I've never seen security like coming in. They just want you come in, and I can tell you several stories that aren't even good, but yeah, they don't care about that. They just care what you have once you're in there. Once you're past that line and you start working, what you're coming out with. Yeah, then they want to see through bag. If they don't, in fact, it's so funny. They give out see-through bags. When you get your little points or whatever you do, you can go down to the little store area and buy a see-through bag. See, that's where they publish it, and it's, bet everybody wants to go get one, thinking it's cool. I never did that, but bag was fully colored. So, but yeah, along those lines, yeah, those, I was listening to like a lot, and I just want to say, people, the people, we're the ones that are tricked into all of this stuff. You know what I mean? We sign on the dotted line. And that's how they are able to do all these things to us, like your camera's watching you. Your phone is watching you. Your phone's surveilling you. You don't even know what it's doing. How many times Siri done jumped up and answered, and you're like, Siri, what the heck are you talking about? She's naming off crap that you, please, don't even get me started. It happens to me every day. But basically that, it's us. It's us. It's all on us. Because was said before, they'll tell you, oh, yo, this is for your safety. All right, somebody was outside robbing in the area, so we're gonna throw a few extra cops out here. We're gonna make everything safe. Now the people that okay, yeah, and anybody with a civilized, thought in their head and just wants to get home is like, yeah, that's cool. Everybody's having a problem over here. But in reality, that's when you sign down the dotted line. So now they're able to escalate this and do other things and tell you it's for your safety, And we take it as that when we all should be bonding together to tell them hell no. And that's the problem today.
Well, when it came to organizing, if you can tell me, how did that surveillance shape your behavior, right? How did it shape your relationships with your coworkers? Because like you're saying, they make the bags a reward, right? You go in there and you feel happy to get one of these bags, but that's part of the surveillance mechanism.
I mean, it goes back to our story. Me and Jerry actually opened up JFK, so we worked there for 4 years. We knew the employees, we knew management, we knew the technology. So it was just being outside, like Jerry said, for the community. And honestly, just fighting this fight is already as crazy as it is. I'd like to add on that, being that they're harmed by this, they can't right now. Only that our building's unionized. There's other warehouses that aren't, and they can still sell the information to ICE. And to add on to that, they actually get funded by the government. So when they get a kickback of $125 million by selling your information. So they have to fire about 7,000 workers a year to get $125 million from the government. And what they do is, well, Jerry, get onto it, which is funding Project Nimbus, which is currently going on right now with Amazon and Google.
Yeah, it's a few countries is going on, and it's going on. Israel is #1 buyer, as we all know right now, and that's attributing to a lot of the Palestinian people's problems over there, whether they realize it or not, because, basically they're being profiled. You're being profiled, and, it's taken from there, like you said, like it's a gut instinct of a computer, or that's telling them that you need to be handled in a certain way. We go through this every day in Amazon labor union too. I mean, it's just crazy. When you're doing things, people feel that they need to handle you in a certain way and corral you in a certain way. So, but even at Amazon, like, the whole thing with that, like you wanted to know was, it had a big impact on the workers there, because I was a worker, and I can tell you, you were told with all those little things, you can't be off your station, you can't do this, don't have time off task, you're running from, and this is real, you're running from, you have 15 minutes break, so you're running from maybe Amazon's as big as 14 football fields side by side. So you're running from one end of the building to get downstairs to eat. By the time you get downstairs, you done wasted 9 minutes to get downstairs because you're running. And so now you got to use that other 3 minutes to eat. And I don't know how we did it, but then you're using the other 2 minutes, whatever, to fly back upstairs to get back up there before the computer, picks you off, and says that you're not doing your work. So, yeah, that became trained in my head. Now, I'm a union man throughout the city. I've worked, so my whole life. So coming here, it was like I realized, holy crap, I'm being retrained. I'm being reconditioned, and that's what they're doing to people. You see $500-600 a week. Some people have never seen that in their life. They're using that against a lot of low income, and that's how they get you in there. People used to say I used to be too rugged the way I say it, but my term was it didn't matter if you were, an addict or a drunk. If you clean yourself up, you can get a job at Amazon. Seriously. Because the whole thing is they just want your body. Just don't go in there and give them a thought or act like you got a brain, because then it's on and popping. All right, so leave your head at the door, bring the rest of your body in, and get to work. That's the way it's designed. It is modern day slavery at its finest, to be honest with you. The computer is the whip. You don't want to lose those stats. And you know how many nights I went home, and this goes for a lot of other people. You're going home broken after 10 hours on your feet, but then you're going home worried about if you made enough stats to keep your job, too. So you're sitting up there, and and that went on for a while until, one day I just like, what are you doing, And I realized everybody else was like that, too. So that's the extent of it, fear. Everything we're talking about here, I'll just say it now, whether we like it or not, it's signs of new world order. Whether we want to, consider it or not, we like, ha, that's not true. Just think about how they're corralling us throughout the city. They're watching us right now. They know all of us that walked in here, It's just when they spring it on us, what are we going to do?
Well, it seems like it's a lot of information, and it seems like someone could get really overwhelmed and really pessimistic about the future. You know, you hear all this, and whether it be on the street or in the workplace, you can't hide from it, right? So what are some strategies, you know, and we only have a few minutes left, what are some strategies that we can do to kind of combat this, right? How can we really take action? Like at Amazon, what did the union do to try to stop some of this or mitigate it as much as possible?
Well, all right. Well, I mean, as far as the union goes, we're always battling them. There are plenty of court cases, so to speak. By the time it's all over, Amazon will probably have to just give in because they just have so much filth against them right now. You know, it's incredible. But what we have to do is what we're doing here. See how all of us are here? Like I say, like, you know, you hear my guy Chris Small says, and it's just the truth when you're out there. There's no greater power than the power of people. If we don't like what we see, we have to bond together. Yeah, sometimes it might get a little messy. You got to get in the trenches, but that's what you got to do. I'm talking about protest or speak up for what's right. And I mean, as a people, as a whole, not just a little bit of us. It doesn't work that way. The only way we run the show is when we all pop up, because then they don't know what the hell to do. What are they going to do? And that's just the bottom line. It's us. It's up to us. Everybody in this room, everybody we can share this message with around, you know, to make this happen. I mean, you know, it is. It's truly up to us. And we got to pop off, man. We got to pop off. Look at the times we're living in. I bet you a few years ago, you know, you never thought COVID would be around. Look at where we're living. Look what's going on around you. And, you know, you just know, you know, it's just time for a change. I'm not saying get out there and become militant. I'm just saying be in the right places to voice with the rest of us, so, you know, it's all of us with one voice.
Definitely, like Jerry said, honestly, it starts with us. We have to be outside. We have to organize. We sat at the bus stop for almost 24 to 48 hours every shift, feeding workers, talking to workers who were fired before we were even certified this year. We were getting their jobs back. And that's what showed the community to stand inside the building. And that's another harm that, you know, the black and brown community makes up Amazon's percentage, about 80 to 85%. And now we're talking about every Amazon facility that's coming up and down the East Coast. It's majority black and brown communities. And, you know, like I said, it starts with us, and we have to take that stance there to fight back, you know, limit orders, whatever we have to do. But it's talking to one another and letting them know that, you know, I got your back and you got mine, and we have to fight this through.
Elizabeth, I use Signal. Is that enough? What else could I do in my day-to-day life?
So I think this is a fantastic question, because what everybody has been talking about here for the last, you know, hour or so is that what surveillance is really doing is it's attacking community. And so often what's happening is we're being told the same way we're told that we're going to save the planet from climate change if we recycle, that we're going to save ourselves from the surveillance system if we just set our settings to private. That is not the answer. The answer is exactly what these guys have just been talking about, which is the way that we resist the breakdown of community is we form community. The way that we resist what is happening in our country is we demand our rights. Not the right to turn your frequent locations off on your iPhone, but the right for your data to be yours. And back to what was being discussed by Fabian around the need for regulation, we need to be asking for it. We need to be demanding it, and we need to be not letting corporate interests determine how this country is going to decide what happens with our information.
Naz, Fabian, is there anything you would like to see more of that you don't feel like we're doing enough, or things that have worked that we should keep on doing in your communities?
For me in particular, I'm like ambivalent, because I've been a part of a lot of advocacy circles and a lot of legislative talk from local level to federal level. Things from not trying to have avoid basically the banning of facial recognition or surveillance technologies in public-facing places in New York City, up to the recent White House blueprint, AI blueprint for a Bill of Rights. Like being a part of those discussions where Where I have my issue with with the U.S. is we're very incremental when it comes to some of the bigger sort of picture goals that have to be met. And like what I mean is by this. For the longest, we haven't had a GDPR, which is a general data privacy regulation. Now, that's not a perfect solution, but it helps get us to a point of having regulatory practices and enforcement measures to deal with these third-party vendors that, are taking advantage of Silicon Valley and trying to profit at the cost of people and data that's not even scraped up in an ethical fashion. So in attempts to try to get there on the federal side, I believe there's been the ADPPA, which is like the American Data Privacy Act. It's been fought over so many times, but then what happens is you may have lobbying where certain federal officials may not be the biggest fan and they have a bit more pull. So the game of lobbying does play a role into things. Where I can say we have made steps in the future, again, it's incremental. I'm not the most proud of it, but it's a step in the right direction. It's like the AI blueprint for Bill of Rights. It's a list of recommendations, basically, dealing with different parts of society in different sort of folds, whether it comes to your public benefits, to housing, to employment, to all different parts of society that we're now starting to realize a lot of these advanced tools have pervasively found their way into the ways in which we interact. And they're not supposed to be there in the first place because they're not even validated to say that they're effective or that they actually make a better effect than like human error or human input. So I say all that to say this. There's the White House blueprint for AI Bill of Rights. You have that. And so where we're at now is it's a push for localities or states and cities to figure out how to go about doing the enforcement measures. It shouldn't be that way. I'm really hoping this ADPPA goes into law sometime soon. It's hard to say that'll be the case, but at least there's recommendations on a national level that localities from cities to states to different levels of government, there are recommendations that folks can follow in order to build out enforcement and regulatory practices. So you'll find that in several states, like ACLU has basically pushed on different forms of like the POST Act. So you have the POST Act here, and then it's probably called something different within other states. Just different ways of identifying that, the need for transparency, the need to like recognize surveillance technologies, and like the need to recognize that there's a need for oversight of these things. I think that's what's important. The way the US works, it's incremental. So I don't have a timeline on like when this stuff will come. I know the conversations are happening, and it's almost happening in a bubble of itself because folks have to deal with lobbying. So I'm always balancing two different worlds of being like a community advocate and then working for state government, and realizing why government is so lackadaisical is because the way state and local and federal government works, it doesn't work at the speed of these technologies. And so we're always playing a game of catch up, and I can definitely understand why people are frustrated. And so that's why people lobbying matters. That's why organizing matters. That's why collaborating, being together, being in these different types of rooms, demanding the sort of rights that need to be made, supporting the sort of members that are trying to push for these grandstanding types of legislation that just haven't been put in place yet, are very much important, because at one end you need people lobbying, but you also need law to make sure that there's regulatory practices and enforcement measures in place, so then you don't have to constantly fight in the dark. It's just not fair to people to have to always bear the burden of something that they never brought to society in the first place. And if there's one thing I'm starting to understand is a lot of times we have to get caught up in the fray of organizing constantly because the burden of responsibility, the burden of acknowledgement, the burden of advocacy, the burden of enforcement, the burden to ask for better, always ends up falling on the people who are impacted. It's always on impacted communities, and we don't even have the resources in the first place, the time nor the money a lot of times to be in these conversations. But people have to find a way out because they don't have another choice. They have to deal with this every day. So, you know, if there's one thing that you can take from this is you don't have to be a superhero. You just start from where you see wrong at. If, you know, I know Amnesty International has an ongoing project where it's like identifying different sort of police surveillance, like cameras and things like that, like within the city. Just finding different things out there that you can just add your voice to, or finding yourself in the circles of the folks already doing the work to already amplify and add actual like capacity really does matter. Because as far as I can tell, it's always going to fall on localities and impacted communities to have to bear the burden of figuring out how to get out of this hole.
Thank you. I appreciate that. In less than 1 minute, Naz, you have anything else you want to add? You sure? Okay, thank you. So I want to thank everybody, all my panelists here. I appreciate it. Thank you. Now we have the real fun part where we get to hear from the audience. So someone's going to be coming around with a microphone, and if you have any questions, comments, concerns, if you